I guess you can say this is a follow-up to the video about centering a church around an individual. I was at the table talking with my cousins about the church, and then someone said, well, Ed, why don't you get your ministerial credentials and you can be our pastor? But I told them, I don't think that would be a good idea. And here's the reason. If I became the pastor, within 1 year, one of two things would probably happen. One, I would probably say something or do something that people aren't used to or don't like, and they would get rid of me. I guess that's the worst case scenario. Another scenario would be within a year, I would render my own position irrelevant. Now, what do you mean by that, Ed? What I mean by that is people are conditioned to have an outsider come in, a hired person come in and teach them or preach to them. That's what people are used to. But what I would do, I would teach them how to teach themselves. In other words, I'm not getting in front of you week in and week out, flapping my gums for 20, 30 minutes while you sit there passively. No, I'm teaching you how to teach each other. Because if I drop dead or I go out of town, you don't need to hire somebody from the outside as a substitute preacher. No, I'm training you to teach yourselves. Because if you really want to look at it, the sermon is not even biblical. Show me in the Bible where someone just flapped their gums and the congregation just sat there and listened. The sermon is pagan. They got that from the Greeks, where people would get up and make orations. Jesus himself taught his disciples, trained his disciples to do what he did. There was a boy who was having fits, and then the disciples were trying to heal the boy, and they couldn't, and then they called Jesus, and Jesus got a little indignant, a little upset, impatient with them. He was like, you guys should have been able to do this. And so that's the mentality. And see, I'm not trying to pick on this former pastor, but my cousins want to put him up on a pedestal like he was just all that. Well, I don't think he was that great of a pastor. Not if when he leaves and goes to another church, the people stop coming. That means they were coming for the wrong reason. He should have been teaching the people in the congregation to teach themselves. And then when he resigned, I was trying to tell the members, we don't need to be in a rush to bring in some hired, paid preacher. We need to stir up the gifts among ourselves. The men, and yes, the women can teach one another. Not necessarily getting up making speeches, but maybe sitting at a round table and talking about Jesus. But people aren't used to that. They have this superstar mentality that they have to bring in a superhero to come save them, to come inspire them, when you can stir up the gifts among yourselves. And see, here's the problem with that mentality. They just were pressed to bring in somebody right away, to be the pastor, to be their leader. And what happened? You got someone, now people think he's boring, and nobody's coming to church service. See, you rolled the dice on somebody, and so I don't know what's going to happen. You know, are the numbers going to dwindle? Is he going to be able to bring in new people and build it up? Or is he eventually going to be gotten rid of? I don't know. But that's what happens when you hedge your bet on one person, one Superman, one HNIC. And as I said in the previous video, that's really not how it was done originally. Now, I know people will say, well, Ed, how come you're always uptight about churches not doing things that were originally in the Bible? Here's why. Churches, many people who go to church are so arrogant. They want to condemn people who don't come to their services and do the things that they do. They thumb their nose at somebody who's not stuffed in a dingy building listening to an HIC talk to them for 45 minutes. They think that if you don't do that, you're somehow wrong. And so I point out that, hey, the traditional church is not doing it the way it was originally done. So if you're doing something that's not original, then you can't get mad at other people who do it a different way. That's my point when I point out that, things like the sermon and the one pastor, one church is not biblical. It's to kind of knock people off that pedestal that they're on, and when they think they're better than someone else. In other words, a husband and a wife can take a nature walk and appreciate the goodness of God and talk about God. That can be their church. But if they're not sitting in a hot, dingy building singing, "Guide me, O thou great Jehovah," you think that they're sinning. You think that they're doing something wrong. So that's why I point out the things that I point out. But anyway, have a good Saturday.